Hello everybody. This week I've been very busy doing lots of things and the weather's been rubbish. So what I thought I'd do is a quick 5 editing tips, hopefully in about 5 minutes. Although if you watch this channel for a while, you'll know that that's probably unlikely. I'll give it a go. So tip number 1 is to assess your photos before you start editing them, which sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. The problem is that lots of us use programs like Lightroom now, which both catalogue and edit photos, which sounds great and is great the vast majority of the time, except that you can put your photos into cataloguing and you can order them by month or day or however you like to sort your photos, and then immediately you can start playing around with sliders in exactly the same program. The issue with that is that the time between cataloguing and editing your photos is, I think, one of the times when you improve as a photographer the most, if you use that time to assess the photo strengths and weaknesses. Because not only can you figure out what exactly you want to do with that particular photo in the edit, but you can also work out what you'd like to do next time in the field when you are in a similar position with your camera. So you might look at a photo and think, oh, I wish I'd changed my aperture. I wish I'd used a different focal length. I wish I'd got lower down with the camera. All that kind of stuff you can figure out while looking at your photos. And if you don't take the time to do that before you start editing, then you're going to miss lots of opportunity to improve. So whether you like to mark up your photos by printing them out and annotating them, whether you like to just skim through your phone and look at your photos there, or you might like to use your laptop while slurping on your favourite soft drink. So yeah, it doesn't matter how you assess your photos. What matters is that you do assess your photos before you start editing them. Like if you were to write a book. I mean, you wouldn't see a notepad and just start writing a book in that notepad. You'd come up with a beginning, a middle and end, maybe some chapters, a plot, that kind of thing. I've never written a book, but that's what we were taught you would do in school. So I imagine that is what you do. Exactly the same with a photo. You need a plan before you start editing, and that'll benefit both that edit, but also your photography as a whole. So yeah, sounds obvious, but worth thinking about. Tip number 2 is not being afraid to crop. Now, I've noticed on a couple of one-to-one workshops recently that people kind of shy away from cropping. They don't like to do it that much. I don't necessarily know why, but my theory is that because of all the megapixel wars going on at the moment, people buy all these high-resolution cameras, and they do so because they think they need the high resolution, and therefore they don't want to lose the resolution by cropping. The problem with that is when you're taking landscape photos or adventure photos, outdoor photos, photos where you've got a relatively small subject in the frame, sometimes you just need to crop, and that's because of a very common mistake that I and lots of other people make in the field, which is that when you're taking photos, typically you're doing so through a viewfinder of a very modern mirrorless camera, and the experience of looking through that viewfinder with one eye is one of complete immersion. All you can see in that instance is the photo, which is fantastic until you edit and share the photo and notice that people are looking at it on a phone or on a screen where they've got lots of other things going on in their lives, and all of a sudden the subject that you could see clearly in your viewfinder isn't actually that clear, and in fact is tiny on people's screens where they've got other things going on, and it's not taking up their sole attention. Therefore, cropping becomes an important factor. Ideally, we would account for that when we're taking photos, but even I, as an experienced photographer, always forget pretty much. And with photos where I have very small subjects, a lot of the time I need to crop those images because I've got carried away with my viewfinder and ended up thinking that everybody would look at my photo as though they're looking through a viewfinder with no other distractions around it. So yeah, cropping is your friend a lot of the time, particularly if you've got a camera with upwards of 16 megapixels. You don't need to worry about cropping and losing resolution, particularly because most of the time people are going to be viewing your photos on screens where they can't see any difference whatsoever. How are we doing on the 5 minutes? Probably not good. By the way, the cringiest thing in the world, I think, is getting bits of B-roll of yourself while you're doing something on camera. Not for me. Tip number 3 is to take breaks in between your edits. Not in between your edits, in the middle of your photo edits, which is a tip that I stumbled across very early on in my photo editing journey. And well, I went to make a cup of tea, came back to my computer and thought, oh my word, what on earth have I done? Because time away from a screen resets your eyes, and then when you come back to your screen, you sort of realise how ugly what you've done is. Very, very important step of the process, regardless of how experienced you are. So yeah, when you think you're nearly finished with a photo edit, go and do some baking, some yoga, what else? Location scouting is another great way to break up a photo edit. That's exactly what I'm doing here this evening. I'm just waiting for the sun to go down a little bit more, and maybe some mist to arrive, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. Still, I've got lemonade to keep me company. It's not beer for a couple of reasons. The first is that I've got to drive home from here. The second, though, is that every time I have 2 or 3 beers and then go back to a photo edit, the photo looks amazing to my eyes, which is fantastic until the next morning when the client emails me back to say that they disagree strongly. Lots of capitals in their email, quite shouty. Tip number 4, less is more. I made it tip number 4 because that rhymed. If you ever get to a point where you're wondering if an effect on an edit is too strong, it's definitely too strong. So basically, if you're using a slider in Lightroom or some other program and you think, ooh, that's a bit much, basically halve it. When it comes to photo editing, subtlety is king. It's much better to underuse a tool by 80% than to overuse a tool by 1%, because 1% too much on clarity looks horrific. I can guarantee you that. It's kind of like cooking, and I know nothing about cooking, but I wouldn't use all of the ingredients that I have in my kitchen in every meal. That would be horrific. Similarly, I wouldn't cook everything at the absolute maximum heat, because that would end in tears as well. And just like food can be burnt, pictures can also be burnt by over-editing. And last but not least, tip number 5, presets. Presets, I think, get used in completely the wrong way most of the time. So I think most of the time, most people use presets as answers rather than questions. And the difference between those two things is very, very subtle. But basically, if you're looking at your presets in the hope that one of them is going to provide the answer as to how do I edit this photo, I don't think you're going to get a particularly good result. If, however, you look at each of your presets as a question, i.e., is this the kind of direction I want to take my photo edit? That is a much healthier way to use presets, I think, than hoping that the preset itself is going to provide the answer as to how you should edit your photo. Because in 0 circumstances will a preset be perfect for your photo. You'll always need at least tweaks, and therefore treating presets as kind of suggestions as opposed to kind of total answers is a much better way to approach the use of presets, I think. You can download some free presets from my website if you're interested. Link in the description. Lots of people have asked if I'm going to provide any more at any point in the future, and I've spoken at length about why I don't sell presets, but lots of people have asked me about them, and I have bills to pay, so maybe at some point I will just release a load more and charge a little bit of money for them. I don't know. Not yet. And hopefully next week I'll be outside. It's always a bit soul-destroying as an outdoor photographer when I make videos indoors. Always feels like a bit of a failure, but needs must this week. I'll see you next week. I also like and subscribe and all that stuff if you don't mind. Much appreciated. Cheers.